When you hear about cars like the Pontiac GTO and the Oldsmobile 442, what often comes to mind? It's generally something along the lines of excellent and beautiful styling, coupled with wonderful engines and transmissions that endowed the cars with a high level of performance. The GTO and the 442 were both introduced for the 1964 model year, and both were trim packages on General Motors A-body vehicles. The Pontiac GTO was offered as a trim package on the Tempest, and the 442 was offered as a trim package on both the Oldsmobile F85 and Cutlass. The GTO was certainly a performance package when it was introduced, and in 1964 the standard engine was Pontiac's larger 389 cubic inch V8, making 325 horsepower breathing through a Carter AFB 4-barrel carburetor. Optional was a 3 barrel setup for that same 389 that made 348 horsepower. Over at Olds, the performance package 442 was relatively tame by comparison. And by the way, the 442 nomenclature stood for a 4-barrel carburetor, a 4-speed manual transmission, and dual exhausts. Oldsmobile obviously used the 442 name for a number of years beyond 1964, and interestingly, in 1965, a 3-speed manual would actually become standard, but the car was still known as a 442, of course. Underhood in the inaugural year of the 442 was a 330 cubic inch V8, making 310 horsepower. Olds effectively repackaged its police pursuit engine underhood in the 442s, and unlike the GTO, which received Pontiac's larger engine at 389 cubic inches versus the top option in the Tempest at the time, the 326 cubic inch V8, the 330 cubic inch V8 was an engine that was offered in the F85 and Cutlass, but not in this souped-up police package-ish form. Regardless, both the 442 and GTO proved so successful that Oldsmobile and Pontiac divisions decided to continue these models for the 1965 model year, and they would end up continuing on for a number of years subsequent to that as their popularity increased throughout the 1960s. Now, one thing that many individuals aren't aware of is that there were some rather strange options that were available on these GTOs and 442s in the underhood department for a number of years. As I mentioned, both the GTO and 442 started out as performance cars, and that was why a buyer potentially looked at them versus other vehicles. But as the models continued to age throughout the 1960s, both divisions added some strange underhood options that you could elect if you picked one of these so-called performance cars. And that's what we're going to focus on in this video. That is the economy-minded performance cars. In other words, GTOs and 442s where you could get not the standard engine, but a no-cost or credit option, low-compression V8. Let's begin with a discussion of these economy-minded muscle cars in the GTO. As I mentioned, in 1964, the GTO came standard with a 325 horsepower 389 cubic inch V8. It continued on with 389 cubic inch V8s for the 1965 and 1966 model years, until in 1967, the 389 was enlarged to a 400 cubic inch V8. At this time, the standard engine in the GTO is a 335 horsepower 4-barrel 400 cubic inch V8. Optional was a 360 horsepower 400 cubic inch 4-barrel V8. But 1967 also saw the introduction of the economy engine for the GTO, an engine that still displaced 400 cubic inches, but was offered only with a 2-barrel carburetor, and opposed to making 335 or 360 horsepower like the standard and optional engines in the 1967 GTO, it made 255 horsepower from its 400 cubic inches. I'm not quite sure what made Pontiac offer this economy V8 in 1967. It seems kind of antithetical to the overall GTO's mission for customers, but they did. And the 400 cubic inch 2-barrel V8 came standard with either a 278 or 293 rear end, but you could also get an optional 2.56 to 1 rear end, so-called economy ratio axle that was not offered with the standard or optional GTO engines. And this would endow the vehicle with not only the economy engine, but the economy rear end, and likely afforded pretty good fuel economy. I would guess that that engine and rear axle combination would get about 18 to 20 miles per gallon on the freeway, and I'm basing that off of the mileage that I get with my 1966 Pontiac Catalina with the 389 cubic inch two-barrel V8 and 256 rear end. So for someone who wanted all show and let's call it less go, you could get your 1967 GTO equipped with this economy engine, economy axle, and drive around in style, but do so on a rather affordable budget. And while you might say, why in the world would Pontiac offer such a V8 in the GTO? This economy-minded V8 would continue on for a number of model years in the GTO, and presumably by the time 1971 came around, the need for an economy-minded V8 was obviated by the fact that all General Motors engines for the 1971 model year were required to run on regular gasoline. So I do find it funny that particularly for the latter GTOs, where Ram Air 3s and Ram Air 4 V8s are often the talked about engines, in some cases the rarest V8 is the economy V8, and you don't see too many of them. And frankly, having driven a number of Pontiacs of the era with the low compression 400 cubic inch V8, it performs just fine. It's not the same, obviously, as a Ram Air 3 or Ram Air 4, but it's not a slouch, so to say, and you're not really in the penalty box when driving a GTO equipped with this particular engine. Now, over at the Olds division, it took a few more years for the 442 to introduce a V8 for the economy-minded consumer. In fact, it wasn't until the 442 actually became its own model in 1968, as opposed to just a trim package option on the Cutlass and or F85s, that this economy-minded 400 cubic inch two-barrel V8 was available to customers. In the 1968 Oldsmobile brochure, it's listed as the 400 cubic inch two-barrel V8 for turnpike cruising. This engine had a 9-to-1 compression ratio, a little bit more aggressive than the Pontiac economy engines, and made 290 horsepower. So it was a bit more peppy than the Pontiac 400 cubic inch V8s. Notice that it says it's available at reduced cost. In other words, it was a credit option for the 442 buyers if they selected this particular engine. This 290 horsepower V8 compared to the standard 442 engine at 350 horsepower or the optional engine at 360 horsepower. It wasn't obviously as peppy, but it still was an overall good engine, and I guess it was a great selection if you wanted to have the looks of the 442 but didn't want to have the cost of burning premium gas. Sad as it may seem, however, unlike Pontiac that had the economy-minded V8 for a number of model years, Oldsmobile's 442 had this economy 400 cubic inch V8 available just in the 1968 model year. For 1969, the engine option was dropped and you were forced into buying a premium fuel V8 if you got the 442 package. And woe is the consumer that had to suffer through such a terrible experience. Interestingly, other GM divisions didn't really pick up on this economy-minded muscle car craze. Of course, over at Chevrolet, you could get standard engines in their muscle cars like the Chevelle that had low compression, but that was more of a function of just the standard engine being a lower cost, lower compression V8 engine. And at Buick, if you got a GS, for example, there was not an economy-minded engine that was available in that particular division's offerings. So Oldsmobile and Pontiac were unique in offering this economy-minded engine setup for consumers. Hope you enjoyed this discussion of economy-minded muscle cars. And if you did, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Let me know if you like these discussions about muscle cars as well. Check out the video thumbnails at bottom left and right for some suggestions for you. And until next time, take care.